presents the launch of Skylab 1. Brought to you by the Gulf Oil Corporation as part of its continuing effort to bring you events of special importance. Here is John Chancellor.
Hello. In a few minutes, the United States begins another generation in space. At Cape Kennedy, Florida, Skylab stands ready to be launched into orbit around the Earth. Skylab is a sophisticated, expensive space laboratory, our attempt not just to explore space, but to use space. Tomorrow, 3 astronauts will join this laboratory and work inside it for 28 days. The crew, Captain Charles Conrad, Mission Commander, Joseph Kerwin, Mission Doctor, and Commander Paul Weitz, all of the U.S. Navy, will do some interesting, some valuable, and possibly historic work up in space. So with 2 rockets ready for space, there is a double countdown going on today at Cape Kennedy in Florida. One for the Skylab launch coming up very soon, the other for the launch tomorrow of the crew. Today's launch of the workshop will be in the most northerly direction yet, at an angle of 50 degrees to the equator. This path will carry Skylab over an area where 95% of the world's population lives. Before the crew joins Skylab, a lot of very complicated things must happen. First, explosive bolts must blow away the shroud protecting the payload. Stainless steel cables then must turn the 22,000-pound Sun telescope mount 90 degrees from its position at launch. If this mount doesn't turn correctly, the astronauts will not be able to reach the docking port. Next, Skylab will be turned so the telescope mount faces the Sun. These panels will be sprung from the Sun telescope to collect the Sun's rays and convert them into electricity. Other solar panels will fold out from the body of the workshop. These 2 sets of panels will give Skylab up to 10,000 watts of electricity. A meteoroid shield must also be deployed, and to hold Skylab on a steady orbit, huge gyroscopes must begin spinning. If all these maneuvers go well, the unmanned workshop will be orbiting 270 miles above the Earth, orbiting and ready for the astronauts. A Saturn 1B rocket will be used to launch the astronauts. They will be placed into an orbit well below and behind the workshop. The Skylab astronauts will be in a command and service module similar to those used to carry men to and from the moon. Once near Skylab, the astronauts will take a look at the workshop and then slowly approach it. We should get some television pictures when this happens. Finally, if everything checks out, the astronauts will dock, and now the Skylab cluster will be assembled, ready for its work in space. The astronauts will climb aboard, turn on the lights, and settle in for the longest time man has yet spent in space. They will study a lot of things, the experience of weightlessness, they will study the Sun and the resources of the Earth. On June 12th, their mission will be over, and they'll leave. The command module will re-enter the Earth's atmosphere over the western Pacific. Its path will carry it to a point off California with a splashdown scheduled to take place about 800 miles west of San Diego, out in the Pacific Ocean. If this first Skylab flight is successful, we will have doubled our space endurance record, and we will have learned a lot of things about our Earth, about the Sun, and about living in space. The first of these 2 launchings is still on schedule, coming up in a few minutes. The weather at Cape Kennedy is clear, light winds. The astronauts are going to watch this launch, and we'll be back with more of that after this word from Gulf. Getting close to launch time now at Cape Kennedy of the unmanned laboratory, and so we'll go to my colleague, Jim Hartz, who's there. Jim?
Thank you, John. Everything is on schedule, and we have just a little less than 4 minutes to go before the launch. And today's launch is an unmanned shot. This is the rocket that will go. It's the same kind of vehicle that powered all of the American Apollo flights to the moon, a Saturn V. However, they're only using 2 stages of it. The 3rd stage is the workshop. The launch tomorrow, we're going to show you where the other rocket is. It's 1.5 miles from the Saturn V pad over on what's called Launch Complex 39B. Both these pads are right on the ocean and about 3.5 miles from where we are and where our cameras are. The weather down here has been both good and bad today. It dawned very cloudy and looked a little threatening, and for a while it thought there might be some problems with a front coming through, and then the sun came out, and looking out I can see that there's some clouds again, and no shadows and a little hazy, but the weather is no problem. About 2.5 hours ago, they finished fueling this rocket. This is known as the SL-1, Skylab 1. And if you're into facts and figures, they put 917,000 gallons of kerosene, liquid oxygen, and liquid hydrogen in all 3 stages of the vehicle, which stands 33 stories high. Now, that portion you're looking at there is the lab, and the second stage, first stage, you can see there the liquid oxygen venting off of the first stage. They keep pumping fuel into it until right at the last minute. Over in the control center, the men are ready for the launch. As John said a minute ago, they've been conducting a double countdown. They are now into an automatic sequence, which means that a bank of computers is handling all of the last-minute details, getting up ready to launch. Again, the 3 astronauts go into orbit tomorrow, but everything has to go well with this launch today. Several things have to happen for it to be put into the proper kind of shape for them to join it. But again, there have been no problems. And we are going to join now, I think, Chuck Hollingshead, who is the voice of Skylab, for the countdown to the launch.
At liftoff. Liftoff will follow an ignition at 8.9 seconds. We just passed the 90-second mark in the countdown. At 8.9 seconds in the count, we'll expect to get an engine sequence start on the 5 first-stage engines of the Saturn V. They'll build up thrust. That thrust will be monitored. The vehicle will be held down for the full 8.9 seconds, and we'll expect to get liftoff right at T0. We're approaching the 1-minute mark in our countdown at this time as it proceeds smoothly. Mark, T-minus 1 minute and continuing to count. A water deluge system now has been turned on, activated at the pad area. Pressurization taking place now, the various tanks aboard the vehicle being pressurized. Switching to internal power. All stages switching now to internal power. All propellant tanks being pressurized. Count continuing smoothly. The water at the pad covering the flame deflectors now. We've passed the 30-second mark. Water also will be coming on to the decks of the mobile launcher at the ignition point. T-minus 20 seconds, and the countdown continues to go smoothly. Guidance release. T-minus 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. We have ignition sequence has started. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And we have a liftoff. The Skylab lifting off the pad now, moving up. Skylab has cleared the tower. Houston is now controlling. Mark, 18 seconds, pitch and roll program started. Saturn now maneuvering to its proper flight path attitude. Mark, 25 seconds. Mark, 30 seconds. 35 seconds, 1 nautical mile in altitude, looking good. Range safety, give Saturn a green. We've cleared the beach. Mark, 50 seconds, 2.5 nautical miles in altitude. Ground display data shows good stable thrust on all 5 engines. Coming up now in 1 minute. Mark, 1 minute. 1 minute, 5 seconds, 4 nautical miles in altitude. Coming up now and period of maximum aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. 1 minute, 10 seconds. Roll program complete. Pitch profile still in progress. Mark, 1 minute, 20 seconds, 7 nautical miles in altitude. The velocity now reading 2,500 feet per second. Mark, 1 minute, 30 seconds, pass through max Q, still looking good.
Saturn now at 11 nautical miles in altitude, 5 nautical miles downrange, velocity now reading 3,300 feet per second. 1 minute 45 seconds, all sources continuing to look good. One minute 56 seconds, 20 nautical miles in altitude. 2 minutes 10 seconds. 2 minutes 18 seconds. Coming up now on center engine shutdown. Center engine shut down on time, reports booster system is engineer. 2 minutes 33 seconds, 40 nautical miles in altitude, standing by now for first stage shutdown. First stage shutdown. Good separation on time.
Altogether, this launch will last just a little less than 10 minutes. They've got to go through another stage.
Show good ignition.
And we're going to stay here and keep an eye on it. John?
As far as we can tell from the flight plan here, all those figures you heard mean everything is working just the way they thought it would, as it often does. We'll be back with more of this. The Skylab Space Workshop is on its way toward getting into orbit. It's going about 8,000 miles an hour right now. Orbit should be achieved in about 4 minutes. Here's Jim Hartz at Cape Kennedy.
That's right. They're about halfway there. The last report, 108 miles altitude. They are looking for a 270-mile circular orbit, so they're not quite half there, but halfway, but almost. 107 miles downrange. We've been used to thinking of downrange as being south and east of Cape Kennedy, but this time downrange is north. Their flight path is taking them up toward Nova Scotia. This will be the first time in the history of U.S. manned space flight that they will be flying that far north, that far, of course it's south and it goes around the other side of the Earth, 50 degrees on either side of the equator, which means that the Skylab will quite often pass over New York City and Chicago and other large populated areas of the United States, and of course also over London and Paris. That's never been done before by American space craft. Over all of China, over a part of Russia, and I think, as John said before, 95% of the population of the world will be beneath its flight path, and I think about 80% of the food-producing areas of the world. And there are many experiments on board to take measurements of these. In fact, that's one of the prime parts of the Skylab program, is to take very delicate measurements of Earth resources, crop production, crop disease, watershed areas, pollution, and various things like that. So that's the reason why we have this rather interesting orbit, and again, the first time. We should have, what, about 2 more minutes to go before insertion. They will insert over the Pacific up off of the coast of South Carolina. Excuse me. John?
Jim, that's orbit in about 3 minutes if it all goes the way we think it will. We are now going to take a look again at that 6.5 million pound Saturn rocket taking off as it did just a few minutes ago at the Cape. 7.5 million pounds of thrust right there before your eyes. ...333 feet long, a 30-story building going up through the air. Powered by 54 tank cars of highly volatile fuel. And into the clouds. Roy Neal is with us at the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston. Roy?
Yes, John. At the moment, Skylab Control here in Houston is controlling the flight. The rocket is still doing very well. In just about a minute, the second stage rocket engine is scheduled to cut off. The workshop by then will be in orbit. It will separate almost immediately from the rocket, and a whole series of events will be instigated, on the basis of which we will find out whether the astronauts will be launched tomorrow. A few moments after the separation, from the rocket, the payload shroud, that big protective shield that goes over the top of the workshop, will be jettisoned or thrown off into space. The Skylab will be maneuvered to point at the sun. Its telescope mount then will be rotated some 90 degrees into its permanent operating position, pointing at right angles to the spacecraft. The flight controllers will monitor all of this very carefully, as they will also monitor two other very critical events happening at 25 and 52 minutes into the flight. When the workshop spreads its wings, not wings for flying, but solar panels that span 100 feet to provide power by converting sunlight into electricity. All of these things must work if the astronauts are to be launched tomorrow. Mission Control will know just about how well they're working in an hour and a half when the Skylab passes over the United States again at the end of its first revolution. We're now at 9 minutes and 30 seconds. Shut down as predicted at 9 minutes and 51 seconds into this flight. All the displays here in Mission Control showing that everything is going extremely well. We should have about another 6 or 7 seconds until second stage cutoff, when Mission Control can confirm that Skylab is in orbit. We're standing by now to await that announcement from John McLeish, who is the voice of...
Shut down. It's separation. The orbital workshop is now separated from the Saturn. It's now on station, ready to deploy its solar arrays, telescope mount, meteoroid protection shield, which will make it an acceptable scientific laboratory for the astronauts for the next 8 months.
We have an orbit. Skylab 1 is in orbit. John?
Roy, I'd like to hold you there for a minute if I could. The last word we had was that the orbit was 236, or they were 236 nautical miles high, and checking the figures, the orbit is supposed to be 268 miles in a circular orbit. Ought we to look at that? Didn't they go as far as they'd expected to?
No, there's a little differential there, John. They're using nautical miles in Mission Control rather than statute miles. So the reference to approximately 270 miles is reference to statute miles. The announcements we've been listening to here deal with nautical miles, and they're just about on the money.
Roy Neal has been teaching me about the space program for about the last 15 years, and he's still doing it, I'm happy to say. So they're on their way, this first part. The next 31 hours are going to be critical for this mission, and the next hour and a half, as Roy Neal pointed out, is the most critical part of that period. 31 hours from now, roughly, if all goes well, the astronauts will reach the Skylab workshop and dock with it and be able to handle some of its systems. But as of now, it's entirely on its own, with this enormously complicated machine that it has to deploy. It has to turn that heavy telescope so that they can reach it and dock it. It has to extend the solar panel so that it can begin to generate electricity on its own. And remember, this is a very, very complicated device, about as big as a 3-bedroom house. A huge thing. The biggest thing anybody's ever put into space is going up there now, and so we'll have to watch it very carefully to make sure that all of those things work. We'll be back tomorrow at 12:30 Eastern Daylight Time with the manned launch, which is scheduled for 1 o'clock. We'll have a special program then, and if anything goes wrong in the meantime, we will bring you bulletins about that. So until tomorrow, for Roy Neal and Jim Hartz, I'm John Chancellor.